Alaikum, peace be on all of you. My goodness, what a turnout on a baking hot afternoon, and what a treat we have in store. We are really privileged and honoured to have in our midst not only a great Olympian, not only a great champion, but a great man. A man who is an icon of the struggle for justice, for people of colour and for the downtrodden of all colours, and who made a stand which many of you who I can see are far too young to have known at the time. But let me address those of d'un certain âge, of my age or older. I was 14 when John Carlos made this stand, and those of us who were committed to that stand will literally never forget how we felt that moment as we saw this great man, this great champion, with that black glove, raising that fist and asserting the power of the fight for justice for black people. We will never forget it, and neither, I think, has he. I asked him if it seems like yesterday. He said he thinks about it every morning. Because I've done some controversial things in my life, but I never won an Olympic medal.
Not yet.
Not yet. Stood on a podium with the stars and stripes, which, like our flag, the butcher's apron we call it, is blue, white and red because of all the blood that's spattered on it. With that stars and stripes above him and the anthem of his country, as hypocritical as our anthem, and the whole of his country, and indeed the whole of the world watching, chose that moment to make that stand, knowing that it would reap a hurricane of abuse and of hatred, actually, from those who were not yet won to our position, our stand on justice for black people in America. And in 1968, believe me, even those gains that we have now, which are far from the finishing line, we were much, much further away from the finishing line then. When the great Muhammad Ali was asked to bear arms against the people of Vietnam and refused, and suffered much of the same hatred and wave of hostility from the same people, and when asked why he wouldn't go to fight the Vietnamese, Ali answered, "No Viet Cong ever called me nigger." John Carlos is a man of the same stripe. He bears no ill will towards anyone of any race, but is insistent upon the truth that black people are the equal of white people and all people are the equal one of the other. And that in 1968 was a very bold stand to make, especially in the glare of 1 billion viewers of an Olympic moment. And he suffered for that stand. And the late and great Tommy Smith also suffered for that stand. Indeed, all three of the athletes, including the white one, suffered for that stand. And if they had not done it, wow, they would have been rich now. And we wouldn't be needing you to buy John Carlos's book at the end here. We wouldn't be needing to charge you £5 and he would not. He'd be fat and lazy in Miami Beach now. But he was not that kind of man. And I thank God for that. And all of us who believe in justice and equality must thank God for that. The 1960s was one hell of a decade. They say that if you can remember the 1960s, you couldn't have been there. But I do remember it because I was too young and too good to have taken any substances that would stop me remembering it. I remember the murder of John Kennedy. I remember the murder of Brother Malcolm X. I remember the murder of Martin Luther King. I remember the murder of Bobby Kennedy. And I remember the stand of John Carlos on that platform. We have come a long way. It's been a long time coming, as the great song said, although the man that sang it most recently has been a bit of a disappointment. President Barack Obama. John Carlos has never been a disappointment, has never let us down. And so it's my great privilege as the Member of Parliament for this constituency, and on behalf of my comrades who have organised this meeting and the brothers who own this premises and who've given over everything to us for free, of course, as always, in order that this great event, by the way, they're standing out in the corridor there, John, it's a huge crowd that's turned out to see you, and by the grace of God, people of all kinds, men and women, black and white, Muslim, non-Muslim, young and old. It's a privilege to be here. It's a day that you'll always remember that you were here, and that you'll tell your children that you shook the hand of John Carlos. John, welcome to Bradford. Thank you.
Let me say salam alaikum. Thank you for having me here in your wonderful city. Unfortunately, I'm sick today. So you have to forgive me if I sit down. I'm an old man now. I can't think about running anymore, so I don't even try. So if you just forgive me for sitting down and talking before I fall down, and I would hope that I don't let anyone down and I can answer anyone's questions or everyone's questions for that matter. Let me start by saying, first of all, I can say ditto to everything my predecessor said. I mean, everything he said, he was right on the money. You know, as an activist, you know, you don't come into this world saying, I would like to be an activist. Yes, most of us, we want to come into this life and enjoy life. Grow up and experience your childhood, being able to be a child and play and do your things, and not be hindered by racism. And when I say not be hindered by racism, we have to look at that word racism and realize that no child is ever born into this life a racist. Being a racist is something that's taught by parents, uncles, educators, people that have that racist or biased mind. I began to look at things when I was a young kid in terms of how things was divided, how certain people were treated as second-class citizens, how people were not allowed to go to a school of their choice or to live in a community that they would like to live in, to go seek a job to support their families. And then upon all of this, to realize that I had to deal with the tyranny of drugs being sprinkled in my community as well. It's one thing I would say that all people had, that God gave you the ability to have a family, to have a unified family where you could sit down back in the 50s and the 40s and have dinner together and have discussion and experience love from your folks. And then to have these drugs to come in and just dissipate your family, fragment your family, and then to see the men start to become missing in action. When I say men, I'm talking about men in particular, men of color. Black men in particular, that's the men that I saw coming up as a kid. But I remember also that my neighborhood was pretty much diverse, just like everyone in this room. We had blacks, we had browns, we had Hispanics, we had Italians, we had Irish, we had every ethnic group. It was like a salad bowl. And we all got along pretty well. And then one day somebody put that seed in, prejudice and bias. And then all of a sudden, I woke up one day and it seemed like the white folks had a meeting and decided it's time for us to vacate. At a very young age, I remember asking my father, I said, "Pop, why is everybody leaving?" My father told me, he said, "Well, son, it's called white flight. We don't know why they're leaving, but we have to sit back and wait and see." But while we were all together, we had a thing called King Kong. It was like a bootleg liquor. Like, if I don't know whether you guys had the epidemic over here, but in America we had a thing called PCP. Like an hallucinative drug. Many young individuals was trying this, experimenting with this, and they had you do a lot of things to put your life in harm's way. Well, this bootleg liquor called King Kong was pretty much like PCP back in the 40s. Men would drink it, they'd go to the roof and think they could fly like a bird, fly straight to their death. When white folks decided to leave, King Kong left with them. And then in the midst of King Kong leaving, a thing called heroin just came out of nowhere, smack, or mud, or dirt. Just was sprinkled in the neighborhood. And I began to follow this drug. I began to look at the zombies that started to give birth in the community. I began to look at the fact that the families was no longer having that dinner at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening. I began to realize that teachers wasn't as astute as they were in school in terms of trying to teach the kids. And then I began to realize there was lack of food, lack of income, because now I began to look at my friends. They was not as fortunate as John Carlos. I had a strong father, a stronger mother. My father was a cobbler, a shoemaker, World War I veteran. My mother was a nurse, coming from Cuba. They were a strong unit. I remember when I used to go to my friend's house, they didn't have that mother and father. They didn't have that dinner at 5 and 6 o'clock. They had an ice box and didn't even have ice in the box. There's no ice and no food. Imagine you going to school for 3 or 4 days and not having a meal for 3 or 4 days and think that you're going to function. You're going to learn. You're going to sit still. I remember inviting all my friends to come to my house, and my mother told me one day, said, "Johnny, we can't feed everybody. We can't feed everybody." So when my mother told me that, I couldn't do it in front of my mother, but I would sneak in the cabinets and take food and give it to them anyway. But I had to find out, why is this drug so devastating? And your father have a tendency to hear from the neighbors, because they had that theory that it takes a village to raise a kid. Well, if I did something on one side of town in Harlem, before I got home, the other side would call and say, "Johnny was doing X, Y, Z. He's running with those junkies, Earl. Why is he running with those junkies?" And I remember my dad telling me, he said, "Son, I got worried that you run around with those dope fiends." He said, "Before I let you go that way, I brought you here and I will take you away from here. I don't want you running with them." But I was compelled to run with him. I had to run with him. I had to find out, why would you subject yourself to this? Didn't you see your father before you? Didn't you see your sister? Or didn't you see your brother? Look at yourself. Why would you do this? I constantly asked the question. One day, old junkie said, "Johnny, I'm tired of you asking this question. Do you really want to know why?" He explained to me that he was a young man just like me one day, and he had his eye on this little girl and she looked good to him. He said he got his courage up and asked her to marry him. And she surprised him and said yes. He said that was the greatest day in his life. He said he wanted to be the best man, the best father, the best husband, the best provider. He said, and then he wanted to straighten his life up and say, "I want to make sure that I can be that provider. I need to make more money, all the money I can make, to make sure my family have all the things that they need." And he got serious, and he went out and he diligently looked for a job. He looked to the east, no job. Looked to the west, no job. Go central, no job. And at the same time, your woman